My name is Sabrina Lowell. I'm a scientist. I believe in data, in rocks, in time, not in fragile things like emotions. Until the day the man I called my husband, the one who once swore to protect me for life, whispered in my ear, "You know too much, Sabrina." And then, he pushed me into the mountain, where he had prepared everything to bury me alive, as if I had never existed. I remember the last light before the rocks came down, and his voice, sweet like a lullaby, cold like a sentence. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you'd stake your life on them, only to find out they're the one trying to erase you from the world? If you've ever felt betrayal deep in your bones, leave a comment below. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll tell you what happened when I discovered I wasn't the only one trapped beneath that ground. I used to think if there was anything that couldn't betray me, it was rock. Rocks don't lie. They don't make false promises that crumble with time. I was an energy mineral researcher living in Flagstaff, Arizona. My work was tied to sediment layers millions of years old and to patience. I once spent 7 years chasing a single hypothesis about stratigraphic formations in the San Juan Mountains. 7 years of long trips, freezing nights at field stations, and pages of handwritten notes. Ethan Rourke entered my life like a quiet pause. We met at a geology conference. I was giving a presentation and he stood in the back row, quietly watching. After the talk, he came up to me and said something I never forgot. "You talk about rocks like they have souls." I laughed. "I do, they're just harder to share than people." Ethan wasn't like anyone I usually met in the field. A former officer, tall, calm, and deeply attentive. We fell in love quickly, married in less than a year. At our small wedding in the Colorado wilderness, he promised to walk beside me, through solid rock or soft soil. In those early years, I believed he meant it. But then, things started to shift, subtly. A frown when I spoke too passionately about a new mineral sample. Long silences when I excitedly described crystal structures. He stopped asking questions, stopped dropping by the lab after trips. I told myself maybe everyone changes. What I didn't know was that the change wasn't from time, it came from a plan quietly forming in the shadows. In the 8th year of our marriage, I discovered a rare metal vein in a remote section of the San Juan Range, an orionite deposit. If my preliminary assessment was right, it could store 50 times more energy than lithium, last longer, remain stable, and be environmentally safe. I told no one, not because I didn't trust, but because I wanted to be sure. I saved everything to a personal computer, set a password, encrypted every file. Not even Ethan knew, or so I thought. One evening, I came home early from the research center. Ethan was in my office. The monitor was glowing. He jumped when I walked in, then quickly smiled. "I was looking for our tax files. You know how messy those spreadsheets get." I glanced at the screen. A file named Orionite_specimen_C6XX was open. I held back, simply nodded, offered a faint smile, and quietly retrieved my hard drive. But inside me, a tiny crack had formed. Like the first fracture in a slab of stone you thought unbreakable. After that night, Ethan suddenly became interested in my work again. He asked more questions, listened more intently, suggested we take a trip for a few days so I could decompress. I was surprised but also relieved. Maybe he just needs time, I thought. Maybe he's trying to reconnect. I didn't know that trip was the first step toward the cold darkness underground, where Ethan had prepared everything to ensure I'd never surface again. And me? I still believed him. Until it was too late. We left home on an early autumn morning. No rushed goodbyes, no texts from the institute, no notes left for the team. Me and Ethan, 2 backpacks, and a promise to rekindle the old days. He called it a geological honeymoon. I laughed at his phrasing but felt touched. We rarely had time alone anymore. Work had drained us both, and I had started to believe the only thing left between us was routine. So when Ethan proposed a trip, no Wi-Fi, no communication gear, I agreed. "No support crew?" I asked as he packed the gear. "Just you and me. Like when we first got married," Ethan said, his eyes strangely warm. We drove 4 hours west, leaving familiar stations and marked trails behind. The deeper we went, the weaker the phone signal got, until it disappeared completely. I vaguely remembered the regional map. One vast white patch with no annotations, untapped, uncharted, unnamed. We're really going this deep? You once said you wanted to be the first to set foot where no one else had, he smiled. I thought this might be the chance. We stopped at a high ridge, right beneath a rocky stretch known as Ridge 17, where I once suspected the Orionite vein might run deep. No one but me had ever marked those coordinates, but somehow, Ethan knew the path perfectly. I reassured myself. Maybe I accidentally left it visible in my notebook. That afternoon, as we set up camp near a cave entrance, I noticed something odd. A footprint. Not mine, not Ethan's, I was certain. He wore deep-tread hiking boots. The print was smaller, worn differently. Ethan, did you see? He glanced down and shrugged. Could be local. I heard some tribes avoid this area. Superstitions, they say it's cursed. I frowned. You believe that? No, but they do. Which means no one else will bother us. His answer made sense. Too much sense. The logic was too smooth. That night, as we sat by the fire, I felt a strange distance. Ethan sat close, holding the tea I'd made, eyes gentle, yet he never touched me. It felt like he was playing a role, the caring husband. And me, like an audience member who knows she's being lied to, but can't quite prove it yet. You still remember my first presentation? I asked softly. About stratigraphic tectonics and deep mineral formation. You were so into it you didn't notice everyone had left the room. I laughed. Only you stayed way in the back. I stayed. For you. In that moment, I almost believed him. If something was wrong, maybe it was just me. Too stressed, too tired from work. But then, the next morning, when Ethan said he'd take a walk to check the geological conditions near the edge, I used the time to go through the gear he brought. One item made my hand stop. A mini detonation cord with a timed lock, carefully wrapped under his clothes. Not survey equipment, no reason to have it. I picked it up, hands trembling. Don't touch that. His voice came from right behind me. I turned around. Ethan stood there, calm, not rushed, not angry, still. As if he had known I would find it. What is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Backup. If the cave collapses unexpectedly, I can trigger a partial blast to create an escape route. We've never used that method. You haven't, but I have. In the military, we had to learn. I set the device down, eyes never leaving him. What are you hiding, Ethan? He stepped forward, touched my cheek like he was calming a child. You're overthinking. Don't turn this trip into an investigation. I gave a slight nod, but inside something had awakened, a cold instinct clawing at my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I quietly reattached a backup GPS to my jacket pocket and tucked a few of the smallest Orionite samples into a container. I didn't know what was coming, but my gut told me one thing. This trip wasn't to rekindle love. It was to extinguish my existence entirely. The collapse came faster than a gasp. I barely turned around when a loud blast shook the ground. Huge rocks fell from the cave ceiling, dust clouding everything. My head struck the stone wall. Everything dimmed like someone flipped a switch inside my brain. And then, silence. A thick, suffocating silence. No sound, no sense of direction, only one certainty. I had been buried alive. I don't know how long it took before I woke up. Maybe minutes? Maybe hours? The throbbing pain at my temple made my head spin. I touched my forehead. Blood. Not much, but enough to know this wasn't a dream. I opened my eyes. Total darkness. Not a sliver of light from the entrance we walked through that morning. I called Ethan's name. Once, then twice, then screamed until my throat gave out. No answer. Crawled toward where the entrance had been. Now it was a lifeless wall of stone. I clawed at the fresh rockfall with both hands, desperate, as if somehow I could dig through granite with my bare nails. "Ethan!" I screamed, throat burning. "Ethan, please!" And then a faint sound behind me. I froze. Footsteps? Or a fractured mind playing tricks? I turned, held my breath, listening with everything I had. A breath. Not mine. "Don't scream," a low, rough, calm voice echoed from the darkness. "If you scream again, more rock will fall." I stood like a statue, spine icy. "Who's there?" I whispered. "Who are you?" "I'm not the one who trapped you here," the voice replied, still not approaching, but not retreating either. "And if you're still alive after that blast, maybe I'm not the only one anymore." I reached for the flashlight in my backpack. Thankfully, it still worked. The weak beam scanned the damp cave walls, then landed on a figure. Tall, bearded, eyes deep and alert. His clothes were dirty but intact. One hand held a makeshift metal torch, the other raised to the ceiling in reassurance. "My name is Silas Mercer," he said, "and I've been in this cave for 3 years." I swallowed hard, stunned and disoriented. "The 3 years? How did you survive?" "Underground tunnels. There's a water system in the cave, and if you stay quiet, stay smart. The rocks won't kill you. People will." I couldn't help but study his face. There was a long scar along his jaw. He didn't look homeless. Didn't look like a hunter. Something in his eyes. Worn down, but still burning. I kept the flashlight on him. "Why are you here?" Silas looked at me. A long pause. Then he sat down on a slab of stone, voice deep. "They said I killed my wife. But I didn't. People needed someone to blame when a town collapsed after a mineral site was drained dry. I was the one who objected to the project. I was the thorn. And you? I'm guessing you once thought you were the only one who knew the truth?" I didn't respond. Instead, I sat down across from him. My body trembled, from the cold and the fear, but my mind was racing. "Your name is Silas Mercer," I asked again. "So your town was Gray Hollow, yes." I took a deep breath. "I'm an independent researcher. I studied the mineral map at Gray Hollow. West Ark Corporation flattened the area in 6 months, then claimed they found nothing." "Whew," he scoffed. "Found nothing? Except my wife's body under a landslide, and a technical accident that got me convicted and disappeared." I went still. I had read about that case, but I had no idea Silas was still alive. And I never imagined he would be right here. "That company," he continued, West Ark. "I've seen their logo on crates in this cave, recently. Someone's moving in on the mineral line again." "Could be your husband?" "His name is Ethan Rourke. He works for one of West Ark's branches. I think he tried to kill me because I knew about the Orionite." Silas narrowed his eyes. "Orionite? You mean the mineral with the energy rating beyond lithium?" "Exactly." He rose slowly and made his way toward a rocky alcove. "Follow me." I followed, step by careful step. My flashlight lit the ground. There were traces, old but clear, of someone having passed through. He stopped, pointed at a rock slab with a small symbol etched into it. A triangle with 3 diagonal lines inside. "They mark all potential mining sites with this," he said. "I've erased a few before, but someone always comes back." I sat down, heart pounding. "Silas? If I told you everything I know, the data, the mineral reports, the proof Ethan knew, would you help me get out of here?" Silas stayed silent for a long time. Then he said, "You have a reason to live, and I have a reason to bring the truth into the light. You help me restore my name, I help you survive." Silas and I returned to the chamber where he had lived for 3 years. Not a normal shelter, but a network of deep pockets and narrow tunnels. He had built a stronghold from stone, vines, and scraps left behind by others. No one else knew those paths. No one but me had ever been brought in. As I sat by the small fire he lit with dry wood hidden behind a crevice, he handed me an old metal box. He opened it carefully and took out a recorder. It looked military grade, worn but intact. "I recorded a clip," he said, voice low but steady, "from a few weeks ago. I wasn't sure who it was, but after you said the name Ethan, I don't doubt anymore." "What did you hear?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He pressed play. Static buzzed, and then a familiar voice came through. Ethan's voice, low and steady, just like I'd heard beside me every night before sleep. "Are you sure? If this gets out, I don't just lose the deal, I lose everything." A woman's voice replied, soft but sharp as steel. "I'm not sure, Mr. Rourke. That's why I signed the contract. She disappears. Everything checks out. We have a death certificate, a finalized accident report, and we have you, the grieving husband who tried but couldn't save his wife. The rest is paperwork." Ethan's breath came heavy in the recording. "I did my part. I brought her to the right place at the right time. The rocks came down. No one could have survived that." Then silence before the woman spoke again. "We'll release the first half on Friday. The rest after the mine transfer is completed. And remember, if you fall, we don't know who you are." I sat frozen, my ears rang like I'd been hit over the head. "That woman's name," I whispered. "Are you sure?" "I saw her back when I lived in Gray Hollow. Veronica Tate, Executive Vice President of West Ark's Western Division." I shook my head. Everything was spinning. Veronica? That was a name I'd heard in a few closed-door meetings, always behind the scenes, never public. Most people didn't even know her exact title. Now I understood why. She didn't just manage money, she managed endings. A chill ran down my spine. What chilled me wasn't only Ethan's words, but the calm, measured way he said them. No doubt, no pause, no remorse. "Did you log the date and time of the recording?" I asked. Silas nodded. "Every file's timestamped. I made 3 copies, one hidden here, one sealed in a waterproof tube, and one I planned to send by radio, but hadn't found someone I could trust." "Well, now you have." Silence fell for a few heartbeats. The fire cracked like it agreed. Silas leaned against the rock wall, voice low. "You know, he showed up in Gray Hollow once? When the mine collapsed, I saw a soldier with that same patch. Didn't know his name then, but his face? I never forgot." Ethan used to be with an extraction unit, government-backed, overseeing civilian projects tied to energy security. I used to be proud of that, and now he's using those skills to silence you. I couldn't answer. Everything I'd believed in, marriage, scientific integrity, the ethics of research, was crumbling into cold shards at my feet. "I think I know why they chose this timing," I said softly. "Next month I was scheduled to sign a preliminary transfer agreement with the government. A discovery like Orionite, it would upend the global lithium supply chain. This isn't just about money, it's about power, control. And I'm the only one legally authorized to claim credit for the project. So you had to disappear." "No, I won't disappear. I'm bringing all of this to light. And they'll do everything to stop you," he said quietly. "Then we start now. We record everything, gather every piece of evidence, and find a way out." Silas gave a dry laugh. "We're in the middle of a stone labyrinth. The way out isn't physical, it's believing there's someone out there who'll believe you." I never imagined I'd have to choose between crawling through a freezing watermilk crevasse or staying behind to die slowly in the dark. But in this cave, hesitation meant death. "We have to get through that gap before the water rises," Silas said, pointing to a narrow rock channel where his headlamp's beam shimmered on black water. "This stream leads to an air pocket. If we wait too long, condensation will drop the oxygen level." I gripped the straps of my backpack, already sealed in waterproof bags and tied with paracord by Silas. Inside were the Orionite samples, the recorder, and everything left that could prove I'd never died. "I'll go first," Silas said, his voice calm and steady like it was just another training exercise. I watched him slide into the gap, his body navigating the stone as if by memory rather than light. Within seconds, his headlamp vanished. I swallowed hard, telling myself, stay calm, breathe, count, just like swimming in a pool. Except this time, there's no edge to hold on to. I slipped into the crevice, icy water soaking through my clothes. My back scraped the slick wall, chest squeezed tight between two slabs of stone. I forced steady breaths, counting in my head. 8, 9. Suddenly my foot slipped from the ledge underwater. I lost balance, hit my head on a rock and plunged in. The current pulled me under like an invisible hand. I thrashed in panic, no longer knowing up from down. Echoes disappeared, replaced only by the roar of water and the sharp pain in my chest as air ran out. I opened my mouth and the cold water rushed in. I thought I was going to die. Then a hand grabbed my collar and yanked me forward. A flashlight flickered in the dark. It was Silas. He pulled me through the gap, pushed my head above the surface, held me afloat. "Breathe, Sabrina," he shouted. "Breathe." I gasped, choking, water sputtering from my mouth like shards of ice. My whole body shook violently in the arms of a man I never imagined would be the reason I was still alive. Silas dragged me to a rocky edge, where a small patch of dirt gave us space to lie down. I rolled to the side, vomited water, then collapsed, completely drained. I didn't think I was going to make it, I whispered, vision blurred, unsure if from cold or tears. He sat beside me, saying nothing. He wrapped a thermal blanket around my shoulders and stayed, still and silent like a monument in the heart of the earth. "In there," I said after a few minutes, "I really thought, if I died no one would know. No one would come." Silas turned to me. "I lived with that feeling for 3 years. Why didn't you give up?" He gave a faint, soundless laugh. "Because I hadn't met anyone worth surviving for." Not because his words were poetic, but because of the cold truth inside them. The way he said it, like he'd buried every hope, yet kept going day after day, for the faint chance someone might listen. "What about you?" he asked. "Why haven't you given up?" I looked down at my hand, still clutching a scrap of paper with the Orionite analysis formula. The ink had smudged, but I held on to it. "Because if I die here, Ethan won't just kill a person. He'll kill the value of science. Of truth. And I can't let him be the last one to speak." His eyes lit up. Not from the fire, but from something that looked like hope. "Then we keep moving." "How much farther?" I asked, voice weak but steady. "Far," he said. "It'll stay cold, stay dark. We might have to dive again, but at the end of that stone corridor, there's a fissure, and wind only blows if there's space ahead." My legs were still trembling as I got to my feet, but deep inside something had sparked back to life. When the first light broke through the forest canopy, I didn't cry. I thought I would. Thought I'd collapse when I saw the sky again. When I inhaled air that didn't smell like wet rock and moss. But I remained still, rooted to the ground, feet pressing into damp leaves, listening to the wind rustle through tall pines like the earth itself exhaling. After all the days in the dark, that light didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a reminder. There's still something I have to do. Silas helped me down the dirt path leading to a small town about 4 miles from the mountain. We didn't speak along the way. We didn't need to. Both of us knew getting out was one thing, facing the world was another. We arrived in Elkmont close to noon. Townspeople stared. I was pale, clothes torn, hair matted with sweat and soot. Silas, with his long beard and weathered gaze, we looked like survivors crawling out of a forgotten earthquake. No one recognized me at first. To them, Sabrina Lowell was dead. We stopped outside a small diner. I don't know why I chose that place. Maybe the crooked sign, or maybe I was too exhausted to care. But inside, on the TV hanging in the corner, I saw Ethan. He was wearing a black suit, standing in front of our cabin, holding a microphone, eyes glistening with tears as the camera panned over. "She was the greatest love of my life," Ethan choked out. "I did everything I could, but the collapse happened too fast. I only hope the world remembers her for the good she brought to science." Each word landed like a needle in my chest. Silas whispered in my ear, "We have to go, right now." We left the diner heading straight to the old post office, now the headquarters of the local newspaper. In front of the faded wooden door I stopped. My breath caught as I read the faint lettering, Caldwell & Co. Investigative Desk. I pushed the door open. The woman behind the desk looked up. The moment her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of doubt, then shock, then something close to emotion. My God, she stood abruptly. I'm Sabrina Lowell, I said, my voice so hoarse I barely recognized it. I'm not dead. Nina Caldwell led us into the back room and locked the door. She used to be a renowned investigative journalist in Denver, but after exposing financial misconduct tied to West Art Corporation, she lost her funding, was threatened, nearly lost her license. Now she still worked, but in her own way, quietly, meticulously, and with extreme caution. Do you have proof? Nina asked, eyes locked on me. Yes, I said. Audio recordings, mining data, maps with their proprietary markings, and an eyewitness. I glanced toward Silas. Nina studied him for a long moment, then silently pulled a leather notebook from her drawer. Do you know what today is? She asked. The memorial. Not just that, she said. A memorial organized by Ethan, with government reps and investors attending. He's using your death to close the deal. Then we'll give them a memorial they'll never forget, I said coldly. Nina opened her laptop. I can rig up cameras, audio, disguised witnesses, and connect to an independent audit team, but you have to be the one to step out. No one else can end this performance. I looked up at her. I'll step out. Silas gently touched my shoulder. No one's stopping you this time. The front lawn of the Colorado State Geological Institute had been staged for a solemn memorial. Flags at half-mast, white flowers arranged in neat bouquets, a large portrait of me, taken during last year's survey, was set above the podium beneath the words, Farewell, Dr. Sabrina Lowell. She brought light to the deep. Hidden behind a line of trees, only a few dozen steps away, I could feel my heartbeat hammering like distant artillery. The early fall sun fell across bowed heads, former colleagues, students, state officials, private investors, and reporters from major outlets. At the center, on the raised stage, Ethan was speaking. I lost my partner, my colleague, the strongest woman I've ever known. His voice echoed through the mic, low and heavy, occasionally catching with emotion. We were together in her final moments. She didn't get a chance to speak. But I know, if Sabrina were here, she'd want us to continue. To keep believing in science, in what she stood for. I stepped out, not rushed, not dramatic. Wearing a worn-out shirt, pale face, but eyes clear and sharp. Heads began to turn toward me. A soft gasp escaped the crowd. A paper coffee cup dropped, hitting the ground with an odd sound in the tense air. Ethan turned around, and his face, in a single breath, shifted as if he'd seen a ghost. I walked straight into the center of the lawn, then stopped, about 5 steps from him. My voice was calm, but each word landed sharp. Sorry, I can't let myself be memorialized while I'm still alive. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. People near me stepped back. Phones came out. Reporters swung their cameras toward me. Sabrina? Ethan stammered, stepping back half a step. How did you? I'm not dead, but you did everything you could to make that happen. Ethan stuttered, eyes scanning as if looking for an exit. No. You're mistaken. It was an accident. I did everything to... I have the recording, I cut him off. Your voice. And Veronica Tate's. Talking about a 20-year transfer deal. About me needing to disappear on time. About the fake death certificate. Murmurs surged through the crowd. A federal officer in security uniform stepped beside me, nodding silently. I pulled a shock-proof USB drive from my pocket and placed it in his hand. All of it is backed up in triplicate, with legal documentation, expedition logs, Orionite vein maps, and the recording gathered by an eyewitness. I raised my chin, voice sharper. I'm here not to be alive, but to prove that some people used my fake death for very real profit. At that moment, Veronica Tate shot up from the second row, her face drained of color. No, this is staged. She's delusional after the accident. She's making this up. A man in plain clothes with a federal badge stepped forward. Miss Tate, you'll need to come with us. I've done nothing wrong. Everything was authorized, Veronica screamed. But no one stepped in for her. Not Ethan, not any legal rep. Only a cold pair of cuffs clamped around her manicured wrists. I turned back to Ethan. He didn't look at me anymore. He stared at the ground, shoulders trembling. You once swore you'd protect me, I said, voice soft but firm. But what you really protected was your own greed. Ethan stepped back, hands raised like in denial. I was pressured. They threatened me. I had no choice. No one forced you to sign contracts over my body. That was a choice. And now, so are the consequences. I turned toward the memorial stand. My photo was still there. I lifted it down and looked at it for a long moment. In the picture, I was smiling, believing, in purpose, in love, in Ethan. I set the photo down, facing hundreds of eyes. Truth, I said, doesn't need a speech to survive. It only needs to be seen, and not looked away from. Then I stepped down from the podium. The sunlight still fell across my shoulders. But this time, I knew I was walking toward truth, no longer carrying anyone else's shadow. I returned to the research institute on a winter morning when snow had just blanketed the walkway, and the glass walls reflected a pale, clean sky. Everything looked the same. The quiet hallways, the scent of paper and lab plastic. But to me, it wasn't a place of habit anymore. It was a place to begin again. Part of me still couldn't believe I was walking through the main entrance, not crawling through cold cracks underground. The nameplate outside my office was reinstalled in the first week. Dr. Sabrina Lowell, Director, Institute for Sustainable Energy Geology. The government didn't clear my name. They turned the cave where I nearly died into a state-protected site. Not a mine, but a legacy. They named it the Orionite Heritage Zone. Lowell Mercer Sanctuary. When asked what I wanted to do next, I answered without hesitation. No extraction, no commercialization. We study. To understand, not to possess. Silas was the first person I thought of when proposing an independent institute. He wasn't a scientist, but he knew better than anyone the cost of humans entering the earth without understanding it. I asked him to be co-founder, in charge of training programs on survival, terrain, and humanitarian mining impact. He declined at first, saying, "I'm used to the dark." But he eventually agreed on one condition. "I don't want my name on it. I want to work. Quietly." Well, quiet ones tend to last the longest. As things began to settle, I received an email with no sender name, only a single line. "You're still alive. I'm glad. We need to talk." I sat frozen in my office. The sender's name appeared at the bottom, Talia Monroe. Talia was my closest friend during our early university years. We shared a dream of independent research, even sketched out wild plans for a completely neutral lab free from corporate influence. But then, she vanished. After writing a critical piece on West Ark for an academic journal, she withdrew from conferences, rejected invitations, and gradually cut off contact with everyone but me. Still, after a brief meetup in Chicago, she quietly disappeared from my life. The last message I ever sent her was 5 years ago. No reply. But now, she was here. Talia appeared at the sanctuary on a gray afternoon. Silas was leading a field crew through fracture mapping, and I was taking notes by the old cave entrance. She wore a long coat, high collar hiding half her face, hands deep in her pockets. But her eyes, still sharp and direct, were exactly as I remembered from our second-year environmental geology class. I recognized her before she spoke. "Talia," I gasped, my heart echoing like a distant bell. "Is it really you?" She nodded, eyes rimmed red. "I've followed your updates every day. I know what happened." How did you know where the cave was?" Talia pulled a small device from her coat pocket. "The emergency tracker I used to carry on expeditions. I always kept it off to save battery and avoid detection. I once rewrote its routing software, added a hidden layer. I didn't know when I'd need it, but when Ethan held the memorial, I checked and saw a faint signal moving, weak but real." She paused, eyes tight with emotion. I sent that data to an anonymous rescue engineer I once worked with. He sent a covert alert to the local forest police, but they were blocked by legal paperwork from Ethan. I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I didn't get there sooner. I couldn't speak. The lump in my throat felt like the faintest light had returned, from a past I'd tried so hard to leave behind. You saved me, I whispered. You alone. Talia shook her head, giving a tired smile. You saved yourself. I just threw the rope. You were the one who grabbed it in the middle of all that mud and stone. I reached out, touched her shoulder gently. In that moment, we weren't two scientists or two women who had learned to survive in a world of manipulation and betrayal. We were just two friends, finally finding each other again, on the same ground where truth had almost been buried. I led her along the old cave path. No warning signs remained. No fences. Only the sound of steady footsteps and the slow breathing of the earth, like it was listening. What will you do with this place? Talia asked, running her hand along the cool rock wall. Create a space where no one has to die for a discovery, I said. She smiled, quietly. The old dream. And this time, it's not just on paper. I stopped, glancing toward the figure sitting by the fire in the sanctuary's center, carving a stick. I'm not alone. Talia followed my gaze. And him? Silas? The man who didn't ask who I was, only asked if I wanted to keep living. You've changed, Sabrina. But not like a flame going out, more like a different kind of fire. I gripped her hand, eyes steady. The fire that smolders in stone. Hidden for centuries, but once it ignites, it never forgets how to burn. A year later, when I stood in the middle of the sanctuary that bore my name, Lowell Mercer Geological Sanctuary, the sun was out again. A rare spring sunlight, bright enough to highlight the ancient rock lines, warm enough to soften a windy day without forcing anyone to squint. Folding chairs lined up in small, simple rows. No red banners, no corporate signs. Just a granite plaque set in the forest floor, etched with the words, "Science is not for extraction, it's for understanding." I held my notes in hand, fingertips brushing the worn paper edge. In front of the podium were familiar and unfamiliar faces, colleagues, students, journalists, a few Elkmont townsfolk, even state representatives. And in the front row, still as a moss-covered stone pillar, sat Silas. In his worn leather jacket, shoulders slightly tilted forward, eyes watching me like always, without needing to say a word. I adjusted the mic, took a deep breath. The wind from the pine woods stirred my hair, making me think of the last time I walked out of that cave, bruised, trembling, heart cracked open, but eyes wider than ever. Thank you all for being here today, I began. My voice came through clearer than I expected. When the state proposed holding an inauguration for the sanctuary, I hesitated, not because I feared what had happened, but because I wasn't sure I was ready to call this place anything other than where I almost died. I used to think betrayal would make you angry, but no. The first thing I felt when that cave sealed behind me was emptiness. I looked down at the crowd, my gaze finding Talia's face. The friend who didn't give up on me, even when every signal said I was gone. And then, in that thick darkness, I didn't see light. But I heard footsteps. I didn't find the exit. But I met someone who had never walked away from the entrance. I turned toward Silas. Silas wasn't the kind of hero from legends. He didn't pull me out with some magic rope. He remained by my side, holding a small flame, just enough to keep me from vanishing into my own despair. Silas gave a small nod, didn't smile, but I knew he understood. There are places that at first glance look like the end, but if you go deep enough, stay long enough, they become beginnings. I'm not standing here today to tell you how I survived. I'm here to say something simpler. I kept living. The air fell still. The wind stopped. A single leaf drifted down from a high branch, spinning slowly in midair like an ellipsis. I didn't survive because of rock, I continued. I survived because someone believed I was worth saving. And because of truth, the kind that doesn't need applause, but refuses to stay buried. In the distance, the cave's former entrance was now reinforced and designated as a deep-layer conservation research zone. Everything there was academic, non-profit, and under independent oversight. No drills, no construction crews, only students, researchers, and people who understood the earth wasn't a thing to plunder. When the ceremony ended, I stepped down and walked straight towards Silas. "You didn't stand up with me," I said quietly, gently teasing. "They didn't need to," he replied, eyes thoughtful. "They came to hear you, not see me." I smiled, shook my head. "They don't know how long you've kept that fire going, but I do." He shrugged. "Long enough to know when to stay silent, and when to light the way." Without a word, I took my place next to him, watching the edge of the forest where light skimmed the grass like quiet steel. Behind me, the crowd began to stir again. But ahead, there was only wind. And light. Light after darkness. Not blazing, not loud, just enough to know I'd made it back. And this time, nothing could bury me again. I don't know if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most. Someone who didn't just lie, but calculated to erase your entire existence. But if you have, maybe you understand. Survival doesn't always come from luck. Sometimes it comes from refusing to let go of the truth. I used to think I'd never crawl out of that darkness, but I did. Because a stranger believed in a worth I'd forgotten. Because a friend didn't look away when the world said I was gone. And most of all, because I decided no one else would write my ending. What about you? If you've ever felt silenced, pushed aside, or forced into the shadows so someone else could protect their facade, share it with me. Will you stay silent, or will you stand and step out of the dark? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the only thing we need to begin healing is someone else who's survived too. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next true, powerful, and deeply human stories about family, choice, and the impossible things we overcome.